And welcome to New Wave Global. You are watching Unraveled with Marvi Sirmed. This is our last episode of 2025, and instead of chasing the headlines, which we never do, by the way, I want us to step back and look at the year as a whole. What it did to democracy, to human rights, to regional peace, and the everyday lives of people across South Asia. Because 2025 was not just another turbulent year, it was a year when old fault lines hardened, new alignments emerged, and security logic increasingly replaced democratic reasoning across the region, almost in all of the countries. Across South Asia, governments leaned heavily on control of information, of dissent, of political opposition, of anything critical to the country's establishment. The language of national security became a convenient umbrella under which civil liberties were curtailed. Elections were held, parliaments functioned, courts sat, but the space between the citizen and the state, it kept shrinking. And that pattern played out, differently, but unmistakably in almost every country of this region. Okay, let's start with Pakistan. Domestically, 2025 was not a year of political easing. Let's say that. The environment remained tightly managed. Journalists, political actors, rights activists, they continued to face pressure. Dissent was it was still treated as, less as a democratic right and more as a security concern. Externally, Pakistan's position changed in a way that few could ignore. I mean, um, okay, now let's start from the April attack in Indian administered Kashmir. Now, after that attack in Pahalgam, and subsequently India's military response in May, the region came dangerously close to another major conflict. I'm not going to repeat the details of, Indian aggression, how India attacked deep inside Pakistan, Pakistan's response, and ball by ball commentary on the conflict that took away it really took away human life in both in both the Kashmirs, on both sides of LOC, and also in mainland Pakistan. I will not go into the details of who downed whose fighter jets and who inflicted minor abrasions, minor or major, in whose airfields or airports or whatever. The key point is Pakistan emerged from that crisis with greater international visibility and relevance than it had enjoyed in years. This shift was widely discussed by international media, regional analysts, senior commentators, and in fact was endlessly reminded of probably more than 70 times in the next 6 or so months after the conflict by none other than President of the United States. Anyway, Pakistan was no longer framed simply as a problem to be managed. It was treated as a necessary interlocutor in crisis containment. High level diplomatic engagement with Washington resumed openly. Trade and economic talks were revived. Pakistan's posture during the crisis, like seeking restraint and international engagement, was read as stabilizing factor rather than provocative, like the other side. And crucially, Pakistan's regional access began to matter again. Its long-standing ties with the Gulf states, its working relationship with Iran, and its ability to speak to multiple sides placed Pakistan in a in a position few regional states occupy, influence without alignment, uh, and, well, excess without ideology. I mean, yeah, but this did not mean Pakistan became a trusted ally overnight. It meant Pakistan became strategically useful again. For several years, Pakistan had been sidelined in Washington's strategic thinking, overshadowed by India centric Indo Pacific planning. That marginalization did not survive 2025. As global crises multiplied from the Middle East to great power competition, Pakistan's geography, diplomatic channels, and institutional experience re entered US calculations. This was not a return to the old post 9/11 partnership. There was no illusions of, romance or dependency. This was transactional re engagement, and Pakistan knew how to occupy that space. And there was the uncomfortable irony for New Delhi. India's aggressive posture in May, meant to project dominance, but ended up accelerating Pakistan's reintegration into global diplomatic conversations. Pakistan could not manufacture this opening, but it did not waste it either. Now, that brings us to Pakistan India relations. What changed after May 2025 was not just the level of hostility, it was the texture of it. Diplomatically, channels narrowed further. Dialogue was replaced by hostile signaling. De escalation existed only to prevent catastrophe, not to build confidence. CBM's confidence building measures became a thing of the past, of yester universe. But what was more disturbing was what happened outside official diplomacy. Hostility became social, societal. In sports, for example, Pakistani players were deliberately ignored by the Indian counterparts. No handshakes, no acknowledgements, no basic professional courtesy. Trophy ceremonies became political theater. Media studios competed to sound more belligerent, more dismissive, more contemptuous, predominantly from Indian side, targeting everything and everyone Pakistani. Now, this did not look like strength. You see, in case India's Goebbels are wondering, this looked more like an insecurity being normalized as patriotism. And when contempt becomes acceptable as, at the societal level, this humongous societal level, it does not fade with governments. Tomorrow, if BJP government goes away, this is not going to vanish. This thing settles into culture, the whole psyche of a nation. And I'm afraid that has started happening or may have happened actually. And yet, I must say this, even in this hardened atmosphere, diplomacy showed flashes of muscle memory. At the end of this year in Dhaka, a somber occasion, during the funeral of former Bangladeshi Prime Minister Khalida Zia, India's Foreign Minister Jaishankar greeted Pakistan's Speaker of the National Assembly, Ayaz Sadiq. A small moment, but an important reminder. An important reminder that even frozen relationships retain the capacity for thaw if political will returns. Well, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but let me keep the hope alive. Let me dream a little. It's New Year night after all. So, yeah, let's hope. Now, coming to India, now that brings us to India. India in 2025 remained, you know, a democracy, but a democracy that was marked by deep anxiety. You know, elections continued. There were elections, Lok Sabha elections in 2024, but in 2025, there were state elections in a number of states. They continued. Political participation remained high, which was like a positive sign. But alongside this, majoritarian aggression became more visible and was more tolerated, unfortunately. We saw this pattern clearly in India in 2025. And this year too saw, you know, like the previous years, the communal violence flare, especially in places like Nagpur. After Hindu nationalist mobilizations, not just Nagpur, but in on the routes of Kawar Yatra, during the preparations of Mahakumbh. Um, in Bengal, Murshidabad, protests by Muslims against changes to Waqf land laws, seen by many Muslims as discriminatory, they turned deadly and prompted internet shutdowns and deployment of the central force, etc. At the same time, civil society data throughout 2025 continued to document caste-based violence against Dalits. In recent weeks, a Dalit groom in Uttar Pradesh was assaulted for riding a horse at his own wedding. These are not, isolated incidents. They reflect a social and political climate where majoritarian aggression is increasingly normalized, and where the burden of that aggression continues to fall on minorities, on especially on Muslims, Christians, and Dalits. Don't forget the violence meted out, the violence perpetrated by the Hindu extremist gangs um, against Christians during the Christmas celebrations. Now, that reminds us how the scourge of majoritarianism remains deeply embedded in everyday life in India, unfortunately. And I must say that India used to be the shining star of secularism and democracy in the whole of this region. Uh, I'm afraid it's no more the case. Calling itself mother of democracy doesn't make you democratic in every aspect, in letter and spirit. Well, a lot has to be, uh, introspected, not only by Indian, but also by Pakistanis and other South Asian countries as well. Now, when we are talking about Pakistan and India, we can't forget Kashmir. So let's go to both the Kashmirs. In Indian administered Kashmir, for example, in 2025, this year brought elections after a long gap. State elections in Kashmir, although it is no more a state, it is a union territory now. But still, many people welcomed the onset of elections as a step towards normalcy. But normalcy remains a dream as of now. Um, the year also made something clear. Participation is permitted, criticism is not. Independent journalism came under sustained pressure more, uh, strongly and more vigorously. The offices of Kashmir Times were raided. Its editors Anuradha Bhasin and Pramod Jamwal were accused of anti-national activities, turning journalism into an object of suspicion, into, you know, criminal act, you know, an act of treason. That contradiction between democratic form and scrutinized substance remains Kashmir's defining reality, if not of the whole of India. But, across the line of control on the other side of LOC, Pakistan administered Kashmir also saw massive protests in 2025. But these protests were not geopolitical demonstrations. They were grounded in everyday grievances: electricity prices, wheat subsidies, representation issues, dignity of the citizens, etc. You know, and these protests also turned violent. There were crackdowns, communication shutdowns, internet blockages. But eventually, negotiations produced concessions and things went back to calm, at least for now. What this showed clearly is that Kashmiris on both sides of the divide are demanding accountability from their own authorities. They're not just reacting to each other or reacting to the tyranny of history. So, okay, now come to Bangladesh. But before we talk about where Bangladesh is headed, we need to pause at what its politics and what Bangladesh has just lost. The death of Khalida Zia does not just mark the end of a politician's life, it marks the closing of an era of national politics, which was mainly defined by the rivalry of two women who shaped Bangladesh for over 3 decades. Alongside Sheikh Hasina, Khalida Zia embodied what my Indian colleague and friend Suhasini Heather once called the Battle of Begums, a political duel that was personal, ideological, and deeply entangled with the state itself. Both women carried the legacies of men who midwifed Bangladesh's birth. Hasina as the daughter of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and Khalida as the widow of General Ziaur Rahman, who fought for the making of Bangladesh. Yet they took the country in sharply different directions. Hasina, now in exile in India after her ouster from power in 2024, came to be seen as firmly aligned with New Delhi. And Khalida, often viewed as closer to Pakistan, nevertheless stood on a nationalist legacy that, like Hasina's, was rooted in the very struggle that broke Bangladesh away from Pakistan. That contradiction of shared origins but bitter rivalry and competing regional alignments is the backdrop against which Bangladesh now enters its most uncertain political moment. For Bangladesh, 2025 ended with Khalida Zia's death and homecoming of her son. Her son, Tariq Rahman, returned after nearly 18 years in exile, reshaping opposition politics and opening new questions about Bangladesh's future trajectory. I mean, now his party BNP is not no more in opposition. At least that's not how it looks. Yet much of the external commentary, especially in parts of Indian media, really struggled to see Bangladeshis as, political agents of their own in their own right. Instead, framing the change through conspiracy narratives, accusing Pakistan and sometimes even the US for orchestrating what they call a regime change operation in Bangladesh, snatching away the agency of Bangladeshi youth who rose against the dictatorial and authoritarian tendencies of Sheikh Hasina Wajid's reign that lasted almost 1.5 decades, maybe more. That tells us, something important, that India still struggles to accept the agency of the people and trust the democracies of its own neighbors. Maybe Bangladesh is not alone in that. Okay, now coming to Sri Lanka and Nepal. Excuse me. Sri Lanka spent this 2025 trying to restore trust after economic collapse. Promising reforms, facing continued international scrutiny, and wrestling with the unresolved question of accountability. Nepal, meanwhile, delivered one of the year's most dramatic democratic moments. Youth led protests against corruption forced a sitting prime minister to resign. Parliaments were thrown into turmoil. Parliament was thrown into turmoil. And attempts to suppress dissent, they were all backfired. It was chaotic, but it was democracy speaking loudly with institutions. It was chaotic. Sorry, usko kaat deं, yeah. It was chaotic, but it was democracy speaking loudly when institutions failed to listen. Now, you know, all of this, uh, keep in mind, and, hovering over all of this was great power rivalry. The US China competition shaped security choices, economic options, and diplomatic alignments across South Asia. India leaned deeper into Indo Pacific frameworks. Pakistan balanced China's economics, centrality with renewed US engagement. Smaller states found their autonomy narrowing. And as always, when big powers make strategic choices, it's ordinary people who live with the consequences. So that was South Asia in 2025, a region of immense courage and resilience, but weighed down by fear, suspicion, and the temptation to rule through force rather than trust. As we step into 2026, my hope for all of us is simple: less hate, more accountability, less chest. Sorry. As we step into 2026, my hope for all of us is simple: less hate, more accountability, less chest thumping, more care for people, less control, more freedom, and more equality, less majoritarianism, please, and more dissent, less war, more peace, for heaven's sake, more peace, less war, less bloodshed, more tranquility, more harmony, more human rights, more democracy. Thank you for staying with Unraveled throughout this year as well. Happy New Year to all of you, to South Asia, and to everyone watching around the world. May the coming year brings peace where there was pain, dignity where there was exclusion, and wisdom where there was arrogance. See you in 2026. Have a very happy new year.